So I attended a research conference back in 2014 in London. In one of the breaks, I started talking with one of the other participants, and we decided that we should go grab a drink after the conference was over. And so we did that, and during the course of that evening, he started telling me about this fantastic archive of old historical aerial photographs taken across about 60 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and in parts of the Caribbean. The archive was assembled by the British Overseas Surveys. They started taking these aerial photos back in the 1930s that were to be used to map the different countries. And this actually continued until the 1980s. And there was a lot of photographs, millions of photographs in fact, sitting in boxes in this vault in Scotland. He told me about the level of detail, which was down to actually observing individual houses, observing infrastructure on the ground, etc. I got really excited and I thought, this is information that we don't really have today. And they could be crucial for our understanding in terms of how these countries have developed. As soon as I got back to Stockholm, I immediately started talking with my colleague, Anna Thomset.
It was kind of an extraordinary idea, really, that people had collected all this data that no one had yet really had a chance to analyze in the modern era. And it goes back before, huge shifts that happened in the last century. So you can go back and look at Nigeria before they discovered oil. You can go back and look at Botswana before they discovered diamonds. And the prospect of being able to do this and kind of to trace out the consequences of all these massive shifts in human history was super exciting.
And eventually we realized that this archive needs to be digitized. We want to turn it into kind of a historical Google Earth, such that you can imagine yourself traveling back in time to observe how a location looked like, let's say 50 years ago.
We started working on the project and the idea from the beginning has always been about that it's not just about us and what we're going to do with this data, but really about it's important to get this data out there and accessible, especially given the colonial history of the data, that this was images that were collected at a time when these countries weren't independent. They didn't necessarily have a say in how this data was collected.
After World War II, there were quite a few unemployed pilots within the ARF. They needed to put them to work, so what they did was they sent them out to take photos that could be used for mapping the colonies.
They flew these extraordinary missions where they call it sort of mowing the lawn. They would fly back and forth in swathes covering entire countries. There's a camera attached to the bottom of the plane and there's a trigger so that the photograph gets taken approximately every 50 kilometers on the ground. In some places, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, there was so little information to navigate by. What they did was they would set up a radar beacon and then they would basically fly in concentric circles around the radar beacon. The images overlap one another. And so then they would print out these stacks of images, ship them back to the UK, and then in a hangar somewhere in Tolworth in the UK, I think, they would basically have people on the ground shuffling these images around, puzzle them together into a giant, mosaic, and then they would use that to basically create the first maps of these countries that at the time were then part of the British Empire. At some point, the organisation became defunct. The archive were transferred to various museums. The museum that was hosting it ran into all kinds of legal trouble and closed down. And this archive was on the brink of being scrapped, falling prey to kind of mold and humidity and decay, when the National Collection of Aerial Photography basically rescued the data. The first phase of this project was really to turn this physical archive into digital scans. When the Department of Overseas Surveys shut down, the negatives were returned to the countries where the images were taken. That's why we're working on the print archive instead.
We got in touch with our now partner in Scotland, and we managed to convince them that it would be a great idea to try to make these images more accessible. What ended up happening in this, that our partners brought on board 7 robots.
They basically adapted a robotic arm that I believe it came out of the sandwich industry. People in England love sandwiches. This is why making sandwiches is a big deal. You could adapt it to basically have a robot arm, pick up the top image from a stack of images. The robot arm is operating 2 scanners, so while one scan is being taken, the arm turns around and loads the next one. I think their record was at least 1 million images in the space of about 10 months, which is really just an extraordinary speed of digitization.
Once we have these images, we need to put all these images together in some way. Now, our colleagues at Berkeley came up with this solution that we use algorithms that exploit the fact that each picture has an overlay with the neighboring picture. And so essentially using these algorithms, the pictures sort of find one another, so we have pairs of pictures suddenly. Now with these pairs, we eventually can create a whole map or a mosaic of a whole country.
And so those are going to be made available under a Creative Commons license for any non-commercial use. So you can kind of scroll through them just like you can scroll through Google Maps or Google Earth today. And you can kind of line up images over time and really like track history.
Anna Thomstedt and I are based here in Stockholm. Together with us, we have PhD students here as well and research assistants working together with us.
On this project, we have access to data that no one had before. I think this project is very interesting because we're kind of laying the groundwork for not only other economists but even other fields to work on as well.
I can see other social sciences such as political science, sociology, history, but also natural sciences that has to do with earth science will be able to use this archive.
We've heard a lot from archaeologists who are interested in using the data to kind of trace out potentially where historical structures might have been, especially those that have been built over in the modern day. You know, you can think about people who are interested in the evolution of coastlines or deserts. You know, there's this big argument in geology, I guess, about the Anthropocene and whether we live in a new geological age or not. The advocates of the Anthropocene date, this transition in about 1950 to this era of, humans becoming the defining force in shaping the world's climate and atmosphere and ecosystems. What's exciting, particularly about this archive, is that we can actually go back to before the Anthropocene. We can go back to the 1940s and see what the world really looked like.
We want to understand ways to alleviate poverty, and I think there are several ways that we will learn about how to do that within this project. But there's probably a lot of questions out there that we can't imagine ourselves that the archive will be able to speak to.